Hello and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Today we look at a gang of thugs who stole cannabis from notorious criminals and spent their days smoking the Class B substance and enjoyed time abroad. In Amsterdam, it emerged. Liverpool Crown Court heard how infamous Hyde Parkers drug gang controlled the supply of cocaine and cannabis in their local area. Thug Nathan Ball, who was supported by Tom Rigby and Jess Fashoni, ran the gang, which was rooted in the Hyde Park area of Southport. James and Jordan Gelling, two brothers who once terrorised the town, were also involved with the gang. The Hyde Parkers flooded the area with cocaine and cannabis for 28 months before the conspiracy finally collapsed and 15 criminals were jailed for 115 years. A source portrayed the Hyde Parkers as dysfunctional individuals who sold drugs to fund their own dependence on cannabis. He said all those lads wanted to do was smoke weed and laze around. The only way of funding that without working was to sell drugs. That was the extent of their involvement really. He said the gang, possibly due to their drug use, seemed to be fearless. He said they didn't really care about anything. They would steal grows from cannabis farms that belonged to some fairly well respected criminals in the area. They just weren't bothered. I think they were doing quite well just before the police moved in. Nathan Ball seemed to have some decent money and I was told he was doing well. 33-year-old Nathan Ball of Canning Road, Southport, 28-year-old Tom Rigby of Ball Cop Formby, and 26-year-old Jesse Fashoni of Bridge Grove, Southport. These three assessed are leading members of the OCG. 23-year-old Brandon Coleshaw of No Fixed Address, 33-year-old James Gelling of No Fixed Address, 47-year-old James Nixon of Old School Close, Banks, 29-year-old Jordan Gelling of Lytham Road, Southport, 25-year-old Kane Doherty of Kensington Road, Southport, 25-year-old Kieran Broadshaw of Ovington Drive, Southport, 27-year-old Lewis Appleby of Forest Road, Southport, 25-year-old Peter Ball of Canning Road, Southport, 36-year-old Philip Taylor of Station Road, Banks, 25-year-old Ryan Edwards of Alexandra Road, Southport, 27-year-old Stuart Sterling of No Fixed Address, 25-year-old Will Gardner of Cheney Close, Blunderslands. The man said the gang enjoyed regular trips to Amsterdam. He said that was definitely their favourite destination. I think they met up with other crooks and enjoyed the cannabis cafes and all of that. They lived for the weed. Liverpool Crown Court heard how the gang brought harm to the Southport area. Vulnerable and desperate addicts were cocooned, meaning their homes were used by dealers as locations for drugs or cash to be stored. Individuals who tried to stop working for the gang were bullied and beaten, the court heard. James Gelling's involvement in the conspiracy was brought to a close after he was jailed for killing a Liverpool fan in Southport town centre. Mr Gelling was jailed for 6 years in 2019 after pleading guilty to manslaughter. Ventislav Marginov. To Gelling, it was ruled, delivered the fatal blow to Mr Marginov, who suffered a fractural skull from the brutal attack and had to be put on life support machine for his injuries. When the Southport man was arrested, he said to detectives, "I'm not asked if he dies or lives. He's injured permanently, a cabbage, I don't give a fuck." The court also heard how leading members of the gang were targeted by rivals. Mr Rigby and Miss Fashoni were travelling in a Ford Transit in the Banks area of West Lancashire on July 7th, 2018, when they were shot at by 4 men in balaclavas. They were unharmed and later gave limited cooperation to detectives in Lancashire. In a separate incident, gang member Peter Ball turned up at Southport General Hospital with a shotgun wound to his left inner thigh. He refused to engage with police officers but did say, "It could have been a shotty. I've been shot, defo." Judge Bryan described how there were up to 511 contacts to one of the graph phones in a day as the well-planned and profitable operation ran for more than 2 years with the motive clearly financial gain. A shift system was installed for those working within it, and drugs driven around to customers in Southport and surrounding districts like Ainsdale. 2 separate graph phone numbers were used and £20,000 in cash was seized by police as they made arrests of those involved, including one single cocaine seizure worth about £20,000. Mr Ball was jailed for 12 years and Mr Rigby and Miss Fashoni received 9 years each. James Gelling was jailed for 8 years for his part in the conspiracy. In total, 15 members of the gang were sentenced to more than 110 years in prison for conspiracy to supply drugs. Speaking after the sentencing, Detective Inspector Catherine Walsh said, "This sentencing marks the end of an extensive investigation which was dismantled this extremely harmful OCG, and I'm sure the communities of Southport and beyond share our satisfaction that these people have been removed from the streets. They will be unable to spread their misery any longer. Drug supply and associated violent crime ruins the lives of countless people and those sentenced have also thrown away their own futures by getting involved. Hopefully some of those jailed will reflect upon the risks, the harm, and their punishments and change their ways. Serious and organised crime remains a priority for Merseyside Police, and we will continue to take positive action against those who blight our communities. Information from the public is vital, and we will continue to act on all that we receive. We will continue to work tirelessly to remove drug dealers from our streets and provide our communities with a safe place to live, work and visit. My message to those engaged in organised crime is clear. We know who you are, we can see where you are operating, and we will come knocking. So what are your thoughts about this Hyde Parkers drug gang and how they would go around stealing other criminals' drugs and consume them themselves? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, stay safe. Hello and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Today we look at three armed robbers who helped a gun to their victim's head during a terrifying early hours raid on his home have been jailed. Joseph Grima, Lee Spindler and Jamie Sheffield are now behind bars following the robbery in the upmarket Cheshire village of Over Alderley. Chester Crown Court heard our 25-year-old victim was asleep in bed when he heard the gang coming up the stairs. He opened his eyes and saw one of them pressing a large black machete onto his cheek. The men then shouted, "Where are the guns?" while holding a gun to his face. Mr. Grima, Mr. Spindler and Mr. Sheffield then tied up the victim and ransacked the house before making off with 2 shotguns, 2 rifles, a cannabis plant, collector's coins and a mobile phone. After they fled the scene in 2 vehicles in the early hours, the homeowner called the police. At 5 AM, armed police followed a Nissan out of the Macclesfield area before stopping it in Salford. Officers arrested Mr. Spindler as he sat in the front passenger seat. Mr. Sheffield fled from the scene but was later arrested at a house nearby. The shotguns were later found on Turf Lane near Macclesfield Town home ground. Mr. Grima's DNA was discovered on all of the stolen weapons and on the knot of a bin bag being used to stash the guns. 2 weeks later, Mr. Grima was arrested at his home in Macclesfield and his mobile phone was seized by police. In the early hours on the following day, he went on the run after fleeing handcuffed from Macclesfield District General Hospital, where he had been taken by police after complaining of feeling on. A huge manhunt was launched and Mr. Grima was later taken back into custody. Mr. Grima, 33, of Waiter Street, Macclesfield, was sentenced to life in prison and told he will serve a minimum of 10 years after he was found guilty of robbery and possessing an imitation firearm. He also pleaded guilty to additional offences of escaping custody and possessing mobile phones in prison. Mr. Spindler, 26, of no fixed address, was jailed for 9 years and 8 months after pleading guilty to possessing an imitation firearm and robbery. Mr. Sheffield, 33, of Eldon Place, Eccles, was sentenced to 12 years and 9 months in prison after pleading guilty to possessing an imitation firearm and robbery. Speaking after sentencing, Detective Sergeant Simon Mills of Macclesfield CID said, "These men broke into the victim's house in the middle of the night with the intention of terrifying him. They held weapons to his face and subjected him to threats which left him with no choice but to give in to their demands." Throughout the incident, the victim was left in fear of what the gang would do to him, to the point he feared if he would survive. This was a pre-planned robbery using weapons, namely a handgun, machetes and knives, and it was intended to instill the utmost fear into the victim or anybody who got in their way. Mr. Grima has shown no regard for the court process, victims or justice throughout the investigation. He intentionally tried to prevent his trial going ahead by threatening prosecution witnesses and has seen justice served where he will pay the price for his own actions. Mr. Grima is a dangerous individual, as we heard in the trial, has previous convictions for like offences. It is clear he had not learnt from previous offending and he fully deserves his lengthy time in prison. So what are your thoughts about this 3-man robbery group who held a machete to the victim's face while shouting threats as to where the goods they were looking for were in the house? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, stay safe.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more content. Today we look into the Northern Bank robbery from Belfast, Northern Ireland, and how the members of the robbery have forever left their mark on the UK criminal underworld. The Northern Bank robbery, where cash was stolen from the headquarters of the Northern Bank on Donegall Square West in Belfast, Northern Ireland, on the 20th of December 2004, having taken members of two families of bank officials hostage to ensure their cooperation, an armed gang seized a total of £26.5 million, which was mostly in unused pound sterling banknotes. This was later recognised as one of the largest bank robberies in the history of the United Kingdom. The Police Service of Northern Ireland, otherwise known as the PSNI, the Independent Monitoring Commission, the British government, and the Taoiseach and the Prime Minister of the Republic of Ireland all claimed the Provisional Irish Republican Army was responsible for the bank robbery. This was denied by the IRA and by Sinn Féin. But what or who is Sinn Féin, and what do they stand for? Sinn Féin is an Irish Republican and Democratic Socialist Party, active in both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. The original Sinn Féin organisation was founded in 1905 by Arthur Griffith, but has split substantially on a number of occasions since then, notably giving rise in the aftermath of the Irish Civil War to the two traditionally dominant parties of the Southern Irish politics, Fianna Fáil and Cumann na nGaedheal, which is now Fine Gael. The contemporary Sinn Féin party took its form in 1970, after another split with the other faction eventually becoming the Workers' Party of Ireland was historically associated with the Provisional Irish Republican Army. Mary Lou McDonald became party president in February 2018. Sinn Féin is one of the two largest parties in Northern Ireland Assembly, winning one seat less than the Democratic Unionist Party DUP at the 2017 Northern Ireland Assembly election. In that assembly, it is the largest Irish nationalist party, and it holds 4 ministerial posts in the power-sharing Northern Ireland executive as of 2020. In the UK House of Commons, Sinn Féin holds the 7 of the Northern Ireland's 18 seats, making it the second largest bloc after the DUP. There, it follows a policy of abstentionism, refusing to sit in Parliament or vote on bills. In the Oireachtas, the lower house and upper house of the Republic of Ireland, it is the third largest party. However, in Dáil Éireann, Sinn Féin currently sits as the main opposition and the second largest party, having won the largest share of the first preference votes at the 2020 Irish general election. In 2005, the police forces in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland made arrests and carried out house searches. A sum of £2.3 million in 2014 was impounded at the house of a financial advisor, Ted Cunningham, in County Cork, and Phil Flynn was forced to resign as chairman of the Bank of Scotland and Ireland because Mr. Flynn was a director of one of Cunningham's companies. Mr. Cunningham was convicted in 2009 of money laundering and had his conviction quashed in 2012, and was later convicted again at a retrial in 2014 for those same charges of money laundering. Chris Ward, one of the bank officials threatened by the gang, was himself arrested in November 2005 and charged with robbery. The prosecution then offered no evidence at trials and Chris Ward was later released. The robbery adversely affected the Northern Ireland peace process going on at the time, and as a result it caused a hardening of relationships between the Taoiseach Bertie Ahern and the Sinn Féin representatives Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness. Although Mr. Cunningham and several others were eventually convicted of crimes uncovered during the investigation, nobody has ever been held directly responsible for the Northern Bank robbery. The police investigation is still open and the case remains unsolved today. Northern Bank, now called Danske Bank, was the largest retail bank in Northern Ireland, with 95 branches. It was then later purchased by National Australia Bank and its headquarters were at Donegale Square, west in Belfast. It was one of 4 banks in Northern Ireland permitted to print its own banknotes, in denominations of £5, £10, £20, £50 and £100 banknotes. On the night of Sunday the 19th of December 2004, groups of armed men arrived at the homes of 2 employees of the Northern Bank, one in Downpatrick, County Down, and the other in Polglass, West Belfast. Chris Ward was taken from his house in County Down and driven to Polglass, where Kevin McCullen, his supervisor at the Northern Bank, had been tied up by men masquerading as officers from the Police Service of Northern Ireland, the PSNI. The gunman remained at Mr. Ward's home, threatening his family. Mr. McCullen's wife was taken from her home and held, and it is still unknown location. The masked men instructed the officials to report for work as normal at the bank's headquarters and left on Monday morning. The criminals kept in touch with Mr. McCullen and Mr. Ward using their personal mobile phones. On Monday, the 20th of December 2004, Mr. Ward was first told to take a bag containing £1 million in cash notes to a bus stop in the nearby Queen Street, where Mr. Ward gave it to one of the bank robbers. This was regarded as being a test run for the main theft later in the evening. Mr. McMullen and Mr. Ward remained at work after the close of their business and loaded crates of banknotes onto trolleys, which were taken to a white van outside. The two employees were compelled to open up the bank vaults by the threat that their loved ones would be killed if they did not comply with the robbers' demands. The white vans made 2 runs back and forth from the bank's establishment to take away the loot that was stolen that day. Around 11 o'clock in the evening, Miss McMullen was driven to Drumkeyrag Forest near Ballynickninch and abandoned in a mix of surrounding forest terrain. Miss McMullen found her way to a house to raise the alarm, where Miss McMullen was treated for hypothermia. The criminals took a total of £26.5 million, £10 million in uncirculated Northern Bank pound sterling notes, and £5.5 million in used Northern Bank sterling notes. £4.5 million in used notes supplied by other banks and smaller cash amounts in other currencies, including euros and US dollars. The police quickly set up an investigation with 50 detectives to assist the process of investigating and arresting the criminals behind the Northern Bank robbery. Hugh Ord, Chief Constable of the Police Service of Northern Ireland at the time, accused the Provisional Irish Republican Army, or the IRA, of organising the robbery. Sinn Féin lead negotiator Martin McGuinness denied the IRA was behind the robbery. Although the Police Service of Northern Ireland initially refused to be drawn in as to who may be involved, a number of commenters, including journalist Kevin Myers, writing in the Daily Telegraph, quickly blamed the IRA for their alleged involvement in the bank robbery. One senior police officer quoted in the Guardian newspaper was saying, "This operation required great expertise and coordination, probably more than the loyalist gangs possess." On the 23rd of December 2004, the Irish Times ran a front-page story on the Provisional IRA's denial of involvement in the bank robbery, and on the same day refused to print a column by Kevin Myers which said the Provisional IRA was responsible for the robbery. Mr. Myers was reported to be shocked by the spiking of his news column stating the involvement of the IRA. Some 2 weeks later, the Irish Times newspaper printed a report that there may be, after all, a nationalist connection in the bank robbery. On the 7th of January 2005, the Chief Constable of the PSNI, Hugh Ord, issued an interim report in which Mr. Ord blamed the Provisional IRA for the bank robbery as well. The British government concurred with Mr. Ord's assessment, as did the Independent Monitoring Commission, who is the body appointed by the British and Irish governments to oversee the Northern Ireland ceasefires. Sinn Féin, however, denied the Chief Constable's claim, saying IRA had not conducted the raid and that Sinn Féin officials had not known or sanctioned the bank robbery. Martin McGuinness is a leading Sinn Féin negotiator and said that Mr. Ord's accusation represented nothing more than politically biased allegations. This is more to do with halting the process of change in which Sinn Féin has been driving forward, despite anything that has happened at the Northern Bank. But on the other hand, Bertie Ahern, the Irish Taoiseach, said that an operation of this magnitude had obviously been planned at a stage when I was in negotiations with those that would know the leadership of the provisional movement. The Independent Monitoring Commission recommended that Sinn Féin was fined for authorising the heist and remarked in the report that the leadership and rank and file of Sinn Féin need to make the choice between continued association and support for the PIRA criminality and the path of an exclusively democratic political party. The Provisional IRA issued a 2-line statement on the 18th of January 2005, which denied any involvement in the robbery. The IRA has been accused of involvement in the recent Northern Bank robbery, and we were not involved. Despite this denial from the Provisional IRA, it was widely believed in Northern Ireland, especially in unionist circles, that the IRA was responsible. Commenters in the UK newspapers speculated that the heist had been intended either to secure a pension fund for IRA active service members or to support Sinn Féin's electoral campaign. In February 2005, the Irish Minister for Justice, Michael McDowell, accused Gerry Adams, who was the Sinn Féin MP for Belfast West, Martin McGuinness and Martin Ferris, who were also part of Sinn Féin MP for Kerry North, of not only being IRA members, but leading it from their positions on the IRA Army Council. On the 10th of February 2005, the day the Independent Monitoring Commission report was released, houses near Barra County, Tyrone, belonging to two brothers were searched in connection with the robbery, but nothing came from the searches. In the Republic of Ireland, the Garda Síochána announced on the 17th of February 2005 that it had arrested 7 people and recovered over £2 million, including £60,000 in northern banknotes, during raids in the Cork and Dublin areas, as part of investigations into money laundering. The Garda Commissioner, Noel Conroy, did not officially confirm that the raids were related to the Northern Bank robbery, but said the IRA was behind the laundering as far as he was concerned. The arrests were made under the Offences Against the State Act. The arrested individuals included several men from Derry and a former Sinn Féin candidate. 3 men were arrested at Heuston Station in Dublin, and Don Bowman was alleged to have been carrying €94,000 that are hidden in a box of Daz washing powder. Mr. Bowman was later convicted of membership of the IRA in 2007, receiving a 4-year jail sentence. The judge said his conviction gave no indication as to his guilt regarding other matters such as the Northern robbery. At a house owned by financial advisor Ted Cunningham in Ferran, County Cork, £2.3 million was impounded after being discovered hidden in compost. Mr. Cunningham and his wife were taken in for further questioning. Phil Flynn, who was the chairman of the Bank of Scotland at the time, a former Sinn Féin vice president and an advisor to the Taoiseach, told the police that he was a non-executive director of Chesterton Finance, a company owned by Mr. Cunningham and not owned by Phil Flynn. In consequence, Mr. Cunningham's home and offices were raided, and Mr. Cunningham went to resign his positions pending the results of the inquiries. The next day, on the 18th of February, the police arrested a man who had been reported to be burning sterling banknotes in his back garden. The man was released without charge, but eventually convicted again in 2009 for possession of 200 rounds of ammunition for a Kalashnikov rifle found in his loft when the house was raided. Another man in Cork handed in £175,000, saying that Mr. Cunningham had given it to him to look after. In a separate incident on Saturday the 19th of February 2005, the PSNI confirmed that it had recovered 50 grand in unused Northern banknotes from the toilet at the New Forge Country Club, a sports and social club in Belfast for serving and retired police officers. The PSNI stated it was a stunt that attempted to divert attention from the Northern Bank robbery, but the robbery investigation was still going very thoroughly by the police. It was later confirmed that the cash sum of £50,000 found at the club had indeed been taken during the Northern Bank robbery. On the 12th of October 2005, Garda Commissioner Noel Conroy told a law enforcement conference in Dublin that Mr. Conroy was satisfied that the money recovered in Cork in February earlier in the year came from the Northern Bank robbery. In November 2005, the PSNI arrested 5 men, 2 in Kilcoo, County Down, and 1 each in Belfast, Dungannon and Collis Island. In protest, crowds started to take to the streets and block the road between Castlewellan and Newry near Kilcoo, with violence and the burning out of local vehicles. Hugh Orr defended the police action as proportionate, while Sinn Féin MP Michael Gildnew claimed the raids were part of a political stunt. A man from Kilcoo was charged with robbery, hostage taking and possession of a firearm or an imitation firearm. The individual arrested in Dungannon was named Brian Arthurs, a member of Sinn Féin and a brother of Declan Arthurs, an IRA volunteer killed back in 1987. The man from Collis Island was charged with making false statements to police in relation to a white Ford Transit van allegedly used in a Northern Bank robbery. By the end of 2005, the police's investigations had resulted in a total of 13 arrests and 22 searches. All charges against the men from Kilcoo and Collis Island were dropped by the Public Prosecution Service in January 2007. Hugh Ord described the developments as a setback. Chris Ward, one of the 2 bank officials threatened by the gang during the bank robbery, was arrested with regard to the robbery on the 29th of November 2005, and the PSNI had searched Mr. Ward's home. Another of the bank employees, a 22-year-old woman who was not named, was also arrested on the same day. On the 2nd of December, the police went in 25 Land Rovers to raid Casement Park, the Gaelic Athletic Association Stadium and Social Club in West Belfast, because Mr. Ward had worked there part-time. The GAA reported the matter to the Irish government, stating that it had not been warned about the raid on the 2nd of December. On the 7th of December at Belfast Magistrates Court, Mr Ward was prosecuted for robbery and using a firearm. The prosecution's case was based on Mr Ward's actions in the days preceding and during the raid, a suspicious work rota and discrepancies in Mr Ward's original statements to the police. Mr Ward denied the charge and claimed that the police were harassing him and his family in an attempt to frame him as the inside man on the bank robbery job. Mr Ward complained that the police had held him longer than the gang held his family hostage. Mr Ward was remanded on bail and a date set of September 2008 for the trial in Diplock Court. At the trial for robbery and false imprisonment, the prosecution offered no evidence. Mr Ward was acquitted of all charges and was discharged by the judge. The prosecution accepted that the work rota change which underpinned their case had been the result of a chance decision by management. Mr Ward's defence lawyer claimed he had been the victim of a Kafkaesque farce from the treatment from the police and his family. Ted Cunningham and his conviction start in March 2009. The financial advisor Ted Cunningham from court was found guilty at Cork Circuit Court on 10 charges of laundering over £3 million, which came from the Northern Bank robbery. In March 2009, financial advisor Ted Cunningham from Cork was found guilty at Cork Circuit Court on the 10 charges of laundering over £3 million, which came from the Northern Bank robbery. Ted Cunningham was remanded into custody and later received a sentence of 10 years imprisonment. Mr Cunningham's son was also convicted on 1 count of money laundering. When Mr Cunningham Sr. appealed his conviction, it was quashed by the Court of Criminal Appeals in May 2012. The Court of Criminal Appeal viewed the warrant used to search Mr Cunningham's house as invalid because it had been issued by the senior Garda officer in charge of the investigation, as permitted by Section 29 of the Offences Against the State Act, a state of affairs which the Supreme Court had recently found to be repugnant to the Constitution of Ireland. The court went on to order a retrial on 9 of the 10 original counts of money laundering against Mr Cunningham. It directed that the 10th, relating to a sum of money allegedly found in Mr Cunningham's home, was not to be retried. Mr Cunningham was remanded into custody with the possibility of bail. At the retrial in February 2014, Ted Cunningham pleaded guilty and received a 5-year suspended sentence on 2 counts of laundering about £275,000. Mr Cunningham avoided imprisonment on account of his bad health and promised to resign from the Chesterton Finance. The sum of £2.985 million and €45,000 that had been impounded during police raids were forfeited to the state. Ted Cunningham sued Northern Bank in 2020 regarding the impounded money, alleging that the Guardian had seized it improperly. The old Northern Bank's £20 note, which was taken out of circulation in March 2005 as a direct result of the robbery at the Northern Bank. The Northern Bank announced soon after the robbery that it would replace its £10, £20, £50 and £100 notes. The new banknotes would have different colours, new logos and altered serial numbers upon being printed. By March 2005 it had done so, meaning that the uncirculated banknotes which had been stolen would be hard to spend, if not impossible. This still left the £4.5 million in notes from other banks and £5.5 million in old used Northern Bank notes, which were untraceable. After the Good Friday Agreement of 1998 had provided a tentative ending to the Troubles, the political situation in Belfast remained tense. By the end of 2004, the different parties in Northern Ireland peace process were reaching an agreement, but at a meeting on the 8th of December at which Bertie Ahern, Tony Blair and Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness were present, the Sinn Féin representative refused to promise that the Provisional IRA would stop its criminal activity going forward. Less than 2 weeks later, the Northern Bank robbery again inflamed tension since. Despite the denials of Sinn Féin, the IRA was blamed by Mr Ahern and Mr Blair for the robbery. In 2005, the UK Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Paul Murphy, remarked that I cannot hide my own judgment that the impact of this is deeply damaging. Mark Durkan, leader of the Irish Nationalist, Social Democratic and Labour Party, condemned the IRA as a criminal enterprise. The IRA rejected and condemnations from Gerry Adams stating that the IRA statement is obviously a direct consequence of the retrograde stance of the two governments. It is evidence of a deepening crisis and I regret that very much. Leaked US communications revealed that Bertie Ahern suspected Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness had known about the Northern Bank robbery, and this made Mr. Ahern's attitude towards them become more strained and untrusting. The Garda's surveillance had recorded Mr. Adams meeting with Ted Cunningham before the Northern Bank robbery had taken place. Alongside the murder of Robert McCartney, the robbery caused the US government to block fundraising for Sinn Féin in the United States in March 2005. The ban was later dropped in November 2005, just 8 months later. The Belfast Telegraph reported that in 2015, 2 murderers were linked to the Northern Bank robbery as part of an international IRA row over the proceeds. Gerard Davison was shot dead in May and Kevin McGuigan was subsequently killed in August. When Gerry Adams denied that the IRA was involved in any way, shape or form, the Ulster Unionist Party, the UUP, announced that it could not share power with Sinn Féin any longer and withdrew from the coalition governing Northern Ireland. Bobby Storey was arrested and released without charge regarding the murder of Mr. McGuigan. Mr. Storey had been accused under parliamentary privilege in the House of Commons of the United Kingdom by Ulster Unionist Party Member of Parliament David Burnside of being the planner of the Northern Bank robbery. In 2014, the former head of the Assets Recovery Agency commented that he believed the IRA was still struggling to launder some of the £26 million taken in the robbery, owing to the size of the haul. Former IRA bank robber Ricky O'Rourke published a work of fiction in 2018 entitled Northern Heist, about a Belfast bank robbery which bore strong resemblances to the Northern Bank robbery as we know it now. As of 2018, the Northern Bank robbery remained one of the largest in the history of both the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland, and no person or organisation has ever been held directly responsible. Who and what do you believe to be the primary source behind the Northern Bank robbery? Let us know what you think about the Northern Bank robbery, and if you believe the IRA did in fact commit this now infamous bank robbery or not. Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and a share, and leave any thoughts or suggestions you have in the comments section. We love to read through them all. And if you're new but enjoy UK true crime content, then subscribe to see when our newest video releases. And as always, stay safe.
On a seemingly ordinary day in early March 1983, a group of Scotland Yard's drug squad officers found themselves combing through a sprawling scrapyard in Dalston, an economically disadvantaged area in East London. Their search for illicit substances amid the industrial chaos of steel, vehicles and machinery would inadvertently lay the groundwork for unravelling one of Britain's most audacious heists. The scrapyard, owned by Jimmy Knight, a successful businessman with investments in the leisure sector, was initially suspected of being a front for drug manufacturing. This suspicion brought Jimmy and his brothers, John and Ronnie Knight, under police scrutiny, a scrutiny that would later prove pivotal. The Knight brothers had carved out their distinct paths within the fringes of London's underworld. John, the more reserved of the trio, managed a garage and maintained a semblance of respectability. Ronnie, by contrast, was a flamboyant figure, married to the famous actor Barbara Windsor and owning a nightclub in the West End. Their foray into the criminal world was marked by a blend of legitimate business ventures and illicit operations, a testament to their complex personas. The narrative of the Securities Express robbery began to take shape when John Knight, inspired by the sight of a Security Express van, envisioned executing the perfect crime. This vision led to an elaborate scheme that involved over a year of meticulous planning, reconnaissance and the assembly of a skilled team. Their target was the Security Express depot in Curtain Road, London, identified for its vulnerability during the early morning hours, when a lone guard would momentarily leave his post to fetch a pint of milk. The heist, executed on Easter Monday 1983, was notable for its precision and audacity. The robbers managed to subdue the depot staff, securing over £6 million, a staggering sum that underscores the robbery's scale and sophistication. The investigation into the heist proved challenging, with the flying squad facing dead ends and a lack of substantial leads. The breakthrough came unexpectedly from within the criminal community itself. John Horsley, a man connected to the robbers, and later Alan and Linda Piola, close associates of John Knight, turned informants. Their testimonies proved invaluable insights into the planning and execution of the robbery, exposing the intricate networks and roles individuals played within it. The fallout from the robbery and subsequent investigation was significant. Jimmy Knight faced imprisonment, whilst Ronnie Knight fled to Spain, evading capture for years. The eventual arrest and conviction of Ronnie Knight upon his return to the UK marked the end of a long-standing pursuit by law enforcement. The narrative of the Knights and the Security Express robbery encapsulates themes of ambition, loyalty, and betrayal, intertwined with the personal dramas of those involved. Central to this story is the concept of the perfect crime and its inevitable unravelling. The involvement of informants or supergrassers highlighted the precarious nature of trust within the criminal circles and the lengths to which the law enforcement will go to secure convictions. The discovery of a secret compartment in John Knight's pub, the Fox, and the connections drawn between hidden assets and the robbery's proceeds illustrated the meticulous efforts to conceal the crime's fruits. Beyond the immediate drama and legal repercussions, the Security Express robbery and the Knight brothers saga offer a window into the complexities of criminal enterprises and the challenges of policing such activities. The intertwining of legitimate businesses with illicit operations reflects a strategic approach to crime, blurring the lines between lawful entrepreneurship and outright criminality. The personal dimensions, especially the tale of revenge for David Knight's murder, add layers of motivation and retribution that transcended mere financial gain. This story, rooted in a specific time and place, continues to fascinate and serve as a cautionary tale about the allure of the perfect crime and the inevitable consequences that follow. It underscores the relentless pursuit of justice by law enforcement, the vulnerabilities within criminal networks, and the human stories at the heart of one of Britain's most notorious heists.
It's time now for a specially extended casebook of solved crimes. Tonight we go back 12 years to April 1983, when a gang of armed robbers pulled off the biggest cash robbery in British criminal history. They snatched £6 million in used, untraceable banknotes, which weighed an extraordinary 5 tons. The police operation to bring those believed to be involved in the robbery to justice continues to this day.
Good afternoon, Security Express. How can I help you? All right, he's a bit tied up at the moment. Can I get him to ring you back later on? No problem. Goodbye. One of your customers inquired about the time of a collection tomorrow. I'm sure you'll call him back. Okay, Paddy's the last one's here. Paddy 1 and 3, pick him up at the door. Paddy 4, get the keys.
Where are they? I said, where the fuck are they?
The keys to the vaults were not where the robbers expected them to be.
Get down. Now, do you know where they are? They're over there, the desk, top drawer. Good boy, Grandad.
We've got 5 minutes and then we're off, all right? Stay where you are. Don't even breathe for 15 minutes. If you try anything, you'll die. There'll be somebody outside, and he's a bloody nutter.
More than £6 million, 5 tons of untraceable used banknotes, was stolen from the vaults. The money, much of it from the Ideal Home exhibition, had been stored over the weekend at Security Express's East London depot, nicknamed Fort Knox. It was the biggest cash robbery of all time.
We immediately set up an incident room comprising officers from all 4 areas of the flying squad from London, and this comprised of about 150 officers in all.
It seemed as though it was a clean-cut job, and apart from the actual petrol poured in the guard, obviously a professional team of robbers. At the end of 2 days, we had no forensic evidence had been discovered, and they'd obviously been very clever.
Well, it was quite apparent that there was an insider from Security Express, because the robbers mentioned to the security guards their cards, their registration numbers, their families' names, and with one guard they even mentioned his pet dog.
And 250, and 250, and again 250, and 250, and 250.
The haul was split into 3 and was counted out by the gang at various locations.
250, 250, and again 250, and 250, and 250. Anyway, guys, I'm going to need a rest here. We're going to need some more suitcases. This is the last one, and we've got 6 more bags to empty. We better go and buy some more. We're going to need it.
For 8 months, the flying squad carried out a series of major surveillance operations on known armed robbers and their haunts. Within days of the robbery, the team covering East London received more than 360 tip-offs from all over the country. All had to be followed up, including one which claimed that those responsible for the biggest cash robbery of all time met regularly at the Albion pub in Dalston. Three men in particular interested the surveillance team. They were John Horsley, Billy Hickson and Terry Perkins. In January 1984, detectives investigating the £26 million Brinks Mat robbery, carried out the previous November, arrested John Horsley after a van used in the job was found near his home. Horsley was cleared of any connection to Brinks Mat, but the Security Express team decided it was time to question him about his association with Billy Hickson and Terry Perkins.
Let's start at the beginning. To refresh your memory, that was Easter Monday last year.
First of all, he was, very quiet about it, but when he realised that we'd been watching him for several months and the people that he was frequenting, and he obviously then realised it was up. So he actually admitted that he handled a vast amount of the stolen money because a hired vehicle came to his address where Hickson and Perkins were present, and another elder man, which we later identified as John Knight, and offloaded about 14 sacks containing money into his garage in Waltham Abbey.
What about Hickson? You two go back a long way. I stored some money for him as well. At my father-in-law's house up in Ninefields. Ninefields? Yeah, up near Waltham Abbey. He came to me in September and asked me to do him a favour. He might still be there.
The officers went along to the father-in-law's flat and they uncovered £279,000 in a false panel. And from the back of the false panel, later on, we were able to see how much had been there, because every time money was removed on behalf of Hickson, Horsley marked it up. And at the end of the day, when you counted it up and added it to 279,000, you reached a total of nearly 400,000.
But the detectives' hopes of turning Horsley into a supergrass were dashed. Within hours of his arrest, his family was approached by someone who suggested that it would be in Horsley's best interests to say nothing else about the robbery. The following morning, Horsley terminated the interview and was charged with handling proceeds from the robbery. But John Horsley had said enough to incriminate John Knight, who owned a garage in Southgate, Billy Hickson and Terence Perkins, and the flying squad obtained access to their bank and building society accounts.
Although this inquiry actually started off as an armed robbery, as it went on, it became more like a fraud inquiry with the financial evidence that we were looking into.
It was evidence like this which detectives found when they visited John Knight's home on the 22nd of January 1984.
The main thing we found was a long list of building societies, various branches throughout North London, showing the amounts that he had obviously deposited in there. He was in fact making deposits of about £10,000 on each visit to the building societies. And in fact, I recall that one cashier told us that when he handed in £10,000, after she had counted it, she found that there was £100 over. She explained it to him, and he just pushed it back and said, "You better have that as a tip."
There you go. And another £1 million for.
So kind.
So much money was involved that the gang had hired vans to move it around. Police checked every single van hire agreement for April 1983.
Whoa! Hold that order, it might be time for the champagne. Look. A white van hired to M&M garages.
We were aware through Horsley of a white hire van being at the scene, dropping some monies and then collecting some. Two officers travelled around North London, making inquiries of all hiring agencies, and they came up with this white van, which had been hired on the 6th of April. It had been hired by M&M Garage and signed for by Alan Opiola.
Police knew John Knight was a part owner of the M&M garage with Alan Opiola. Opiola was brought in for questioning. He was shocked to discover that the flying squad knew he'd hired a white van, and that they also knew it had been used to transfer some of the stolen money.
What's going to happen now?
That, Alan, is largely up to you. What I know is that you're a key suspect in a £6 million robbery.
And if you go down for that, you won't see North London again until the end of the century. Think of your wife. Think of your family. How are they going to cope?
That night, Opiola agreed to become a supergrass. The following day, his wife Linda did likewise.
Anyway, so about 2 days after the robbery, Terence Perkins and John Knight came to the garage, asked me if I'd hire a van for them. Then they asked me if they could use the house to count the money. You ever seen what 2 million quid looks like? Huh?
When Linda and Alan Opiola decided to give Queen's evidence, we placed Linda Opiola together with her mother-in-law and her young daughter in a secure premises. And at that time we had a 24-hour armed guard on her. We felt this was important at that time because the threat against Linda and her family was quite real.
Threatening calls were made by Jimmy Knight, one of John Knight's brothers, to Linda Opiola. He warned her and her husband not to talk to the police.
When we went to James Knight's place, it's quite a large building in 22 acres. The property was searched and nearly enough £20,000 was recovered.
Jimmy Knight was also charged with the robbery, but the flying squad was convinced that at least 6 others were involved. The question was, who were they? The answer lay behind the walls of Jimmy Knight's scrapyard in East London.
Ian Malone, he was attached to the drug squad, after hearing who we'd arrested, informed us that he actually turned the place over on a search warrant, James Knight's scrapyard in Dalston. This was some 3 weeks prior to the robbery. Present were 6 men: James Knight, John Knight, Terence Perkins, Billy Hickson. And he also mentioned that 2 other men, Ronnie Everett and John Mason, were also present.
Flying squad detectives arrested Mason and Everett, and their bank and building society accounts were closely examined. But there was no evidence to link them to the robbery, and they were released. A few weeks later, both men had left England for a new life abroad. But they weren't alone. Within 24 hours of John Knight's arrest, 2 other men had already fled to Spain. They were another Knight brother, Ronnie, and the former Cray twins henchman, Freddie Foreman. Another man, known to the police, was already there, Clifford Sachs, a London publican who'd moved to Fuengirola in December 1983, having sold his pub, The Fox, in Hackney, shortly after the Security Express robbery. The first Security Express trial ended on the 7th of June 1985. John Knight was sentenced to 22 years for robbery, while Jimmy Knight got 8 years after being found guilty of handling some of the stolen money. Billy Hickson got 6 years also for handling. Terence Perkins pleaded not guilty to robbery, but was found guilty, and he was sentenced to 22 years. John Horsley admitted robbery and got 8 years. Alan Opiola, the prosecution's chief witness, admitted handling some of the money and received a 3.5-year prison sentence. After the break, the Spanish connection, suspects on the run, and how justice caught up with them. With the first trial over, detectives switched their attention to the group of London villains who'd moved to Spain in the preceding months.
Officers from the inquiry went to Spain in June of 1984 to make inquiries about John Knight and properties that he was purchasing over there. And they became aware of other people from London who had suddenly arrived in the Costa del Sol the previous year and had started spending large amounts of money and purchasing properties.
John Mason and Ronnie Everett had already been questioned about their role in the robbery. They'd been released on police bail, but decided to flee to Spain, where they bought a number of luxury apartments in this exclusive block in Marbella. In 1984, the flying squad discovered that they shared a safety deposit box at this Spanish bank.
We went to a local magistrate's court to apply for a search warrant. It took us several hours. When we got back to the bank and opened up the boxes, they were completely empty. We were absolutely gutted. But when we established from the bank records, we discovered that Everett and Mason had been in the interim period and obviously emptied it.
Freddie Foreman was the third suspect police wanted to question about the robbery after he also bought property in this block in Spain. At the time of the Security Express job, he and his wife Maureen's joint account contained just £72.69. They also couldn't afford the rent on their flat in Bermondsey.
By April of 1983, he was receiving assistance from the local council to pay for his council flat. He was having difficulties there financially. His bank account wasn't all that clever. And then all of a sudden, by June, he was spending £76,000 buying a nice house in Marbella. And then by August, he'd spent another £100,000 buying 3 flats in the same luxury complex. So the money had to come from somewhere.
Following the robbery, Foreman made a series of cash deposits at the Allied Irish Bank in Lewisham. In May, he deposited £20,000. The following month, £114,500 went into his account, and in July, he deposited just under £250,000. By November 1983, £363,280 had been deposited in the account. Later that year, he invested much of the money in this bar in the hills above Marbella. Clifford Sachs was another robbery suspect police were keen to question. Like the others, the former pub landlord had bought property in Spain shortly after the robbery. He paid cash for 2 villas next door to each other. One he lived in with his wife Vera, the other he rented out.
He in fact was the licensee of the Fox public house, and soon after the robbery he in fact started to go into the process of selling it, and we discovered that he was in fact buying villas in Spain which came to a total of over £100,000. And when we made our inquiries at the public house about the sale, we discovered that he probably only got about £10,000 for it. So there was an enormous difference from what he was selling the pub for and what he was buying the villas in Spain for.
Detectives had discovered the name of Sachs's business partner in the Fox pub, John Knight. By the end of 1984, a fourth Londoner had entered the frame, Ronnie Knight, best known as the flamboyant owner of nightclubs and the husband of carry-on star Barbara Windsor. He'd fled to the Costa del Sol with his new girlfriend, Sue Haylock, just hours after his older brother John had been arrested.
Ronnie and his brother John had always had Costa del Sol connections. In fact, the house that he lived in was a property that he'd bought together, first of all with his brother and then with Barbara Windsor. As regards the others, well, back in 1983-84, there was still no extradition treaty between Britain and Spain. That didn't come in until 1986.
By the end of 1984, detectives were convinced that Ronnie Knight had almost certainly been involved in the Security Express job. His bank records revealed that in the days following the robbery, he'd deposited £34,000 in cash. In July 1983, £222,000 went into his bank accounts. Between October and December, he deposited a further £46,813. By the following January, when he fled to Spain, nearly £315,000 had gone into his account. Years later, Knight would claim in his book Black Knight that the money had come from selling businesses in London. Detectives were able to destroy that defence.
He put forward a story of receiving £80,000 as his share of a pornographic outfit in the West End, which he gave to his accountant in 1983. The man he named, we were in a position to prove that that man had died 2 years previously, so couldn't possibly give them the money.
With the lack of a formal extradition agreement between Britain and Spain, Mason, Everett, Sachs, Foreman and Knight were beyond the reach of British justice. But by 1985, the Spaniards were coming under increasing pressure to expel the fugitives and force them to return to Britain. Ronnie Knight and Sue Haylock got on with their lives, and in a grand clifftop setting, the couple celebrated their marriage in 1986. The wedding guests included Clifford Sachs, Ronnie Everett, John Mason and Freddie Foreman. But the celebrations weren't to last. In July 1989, the Spanish acted.
Freddie Foreman was arrested leaving a certain lady's flat in Marbella and put in a police car. He thought he was going to the police station where they took him to, and then he would probably be released. In fact, it wasn't until he was actually driven onto the tarmac at Malaga Airport that he realised what was going to happen. It took about, I think it was 7 Spanish police officers to get him on the plane.
The first we knew of it was when he landed at Heathrow Airport. We had a warrant and he was arrested.
In April 1990, Foreman was jailed for 9 years for handling proceeds of the Security Express robbery. The Old Bailey jury had found him not guilty of taking part in the robbery. Ronnie Knight was becoming more and more isolated in Spain.
I think that he became past his sell-by date in terms of a lot of the younger villains anyway that came down here. The Costa del Sol, whether you are or whether you're not a villain, is a very small world, particularly for someone who can't go home. It's okay, if you're a retired expat, it's a gilded cage. If you're a villain who can't go home, it's just an open prison in the sun.
The crime scene in the south of Spain was changing fast. The new breed of criminal, mainly big-time drug dealers, despised the likes of Ronnie Knight, who still basked under the media spotlight and lived up to his nickname, the Celebrity.
What's happened is a lot of the villains that come here now have not come here because they're running away from anything. They've come here because they're here to do business. They have a different set of rules, a different way of doing things. They're not frightened of using violence. They have a different code of conduct, so even if you happen to have done a big blag and are a big name, you don't mean anything to them, and they react accordingly. He became, let's say to a certain extent, a spent force in the eyes of a lot of the people that are here. So come 1994, when someone in his position has not got the respect they used to command, then really it's time to move on.
On the 2nd of May last year, Ronnie Knight said goodbye to his wife and to Spain and boarded a plane to Luton Airport, laid on by Sky Television.
We received a phone call about just after 2 in the afternoon to say that he'd be landing at Luton Airport about 3:30. So we had to get together, team, get changed and meet and get up to the airport to meet him.
Sunshine.
It was a bit of a rush.
It's been a long time, hasn't it?
In the past, most people read, when they read about Ronnie Knight, have always been told how well he likes to be presented. Silk shirts, silk tie, smart suits and shoes, etc. And bearing in mind that he'd actually come over here to give himself up, so he would be here quite some time, he was carrying a holdall with 4 pairs of shoes in it and a razor, and that was it.
Get away, Ronnie!
On the 3rd of January this year, Knight stood trial at the Old Bailey charged with robbery. For over 10 years, he'd professed his innocence and claimed that, like his brothers John and Jimmy, he'd been set up by the police. But the following day, he changed his mind and pleaded guilty to handling. He was jailed for 7 years. 12 years after the Security Express robbery, the police investigation continues.
We still have the warrants outstanding for those currently staying in Spain or remaining in Spain. They will always be in existence. There's sufficient evidence, we believe, to convict any one of them should they come back.
Today, Sue Haylock lives alone on the Costa del Sol. Security Express has started legal proceedings to gain ownership of the Villa Limonar. She now scrapes a living by running the kitchen at Wynn's Bar near where she lives. She declined to be interviewed. Clifford Sachs is also still living on the Costa del Sol. His wife died 2 years ago, and nowadays he spends most of his time drinking in the local bars. He has no intention of ever returning to London.
Do you have any plans to return to England?
No, still no. I'm happy here. The only one they got to get me is to get my bones over there. So.
Ronnie Everett still lives in this block of luxury flats in the centre of Marbella, while Mason has moved a few miles away to this exclusive estate along the coast. They're rarely seen in public, and this is the first time either has been filmed. Every Saturday, John Mason meets up with Ronnie Everett for lunch at a nearby restaurant.
Mr. Mason? Mr. Mason? Mr. Mason, there's a warrant out for your arrest. Do you have any intention of coming back to England? Mr. Mason?
Mason was reluctant to talk about the robbery or to explain how he makes a living today. Freddie Foreman served fewer than 4 of the 9 years of his sentence before being released. He was seen in public earlier this year as a pallbearer at Ronnie Cray's funeral. He's since been spotted on the Costa del Sol. Jimmy Knight, too, has been released from prison and has returned to live in the Algarve. Alan and Linda Opiola were placed on a witness protection program by the police and given new identities. An underworld contract on their lives still exists. Ronnie Knight gets on with his jail sentence. At Parkhurst, his vegetable garden won him an award. Recently, he was transferred to a lower security prison. He's 61 years old and broke. He'll be eligible for release in 1997. 2 of the £6 million stolen in the Security Express robbery has never been recovered.
What's happened to all the money?
Troubles out there.
We should point out that Security Express radically changed security procedures in the wake of the robbery.
In conclusion, the Securities Express robbery, orchestrated by John Knight and his accomplices, remains one of the most audacious and meticulously planned heists in British criminal history. It underscores the fine line between genius and criminality, revealing how ambition and the quest for the perfect crime can lead to one's downfall. The saga of the Knight brothers, from their humble beginnings in Dalston to becoming central figures in one of the country's most talked about crimes, encapsulates the broader narrative about family, loyalty, and the consequences of a life led on the wrong side of the law. The involvement of informants or supergrasses in cracking these cases highlight the complexities of criminal investigations and the ethical dilemmas faced by law enforcement in their pursuit of justice. The aftermath of the robbery and the subsequent trials and convictions reveal the intricate dance between criminals and the police, a dance that often involves betrayal, fear, and the hope of redemption. As we reflect on this remarkable chapter of crime and punishment, it invites us to ponder several questions about the nature of criminality, justice, and society's response to both. What drives individuals to pursue a path of high-stake crime, knowing the potential consequences of their actions? How do personal relationships and loyalties within the criminal networks influence the dynamic of criminal enterprises and their eventual unravelling? In what ways do stories like that of the Security Express robbery challenge our perceptions of criminals as mere lawbreakers, revealing instead the complex human stories behind the headlines? The role of supergrasses in solving crimes is controversial and fraught with ethical considerations. Is their use a necessary tool in the fight against organised crime, or does it undermine the principles of justice and a fair trial? The Knight brothers' story is also one of social and economic context. How do societal conditions and opportunities, or the lack thereof, contribute to the choices that lead individuals down the path of crime? These questions invite us to engage in a deeper conversation about the factors that lead individuals to commit acts of crime, and the ways in which society responds to these acts. The Security Express robbery, with its dramatic execution and equally dramatic aftermath, serves as a catalyst for these discussions, challenging us to look beyond the crime itself and consider the broader implications for justice, morality, and human behaviour.